From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, everybody in this part of the country is a little sad today. Waukesha, of course, right down the road here from Milwaukee and River West, where I sit, just a little bit west on I-94. I don't have to tell you the news, of course, the terrible story of the man who raced his SUV through a Christmas parade, killing at least 5. We're hoping the death toll stays at 5. A couple people still in critical condition, dozens hurt. You'll hear a lot of people say how this is senseless. Of course, that's a favorite word that comes out at times like this. And yeah, we want to focus our attention on the victims, send them their thoughts and prayers, of course. Nothing wrong with any of that. I will be criticized because I want to talk about the perpetrator. Well, let's not make this about me. Just generally speaking, a lot of people will say, no, keep the focus where it ought to be. Well, I think the focus ought to be, in tragic times like this, I think a good part of the focus ought to be on the perpetrator. We need to know why, how, and to try to come to some understanding of what we can do to prevent such acts in the future. Well, in this case, and in almost every single case, it's practically universal. It's a man. We can't ignore that. I think this is a men's issue. And as we're learning a little bit about this guy, has a history of domestic violence. In fact, it was a domestic violent incident immediately prior to his rampage that set events in motion. Prior to that, he had been released from custody in a strikingly similar case. I'm reading now from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, in which he was accused of driving over a woman during a domestic dispute, sending her to the hospital and leaving tire marks on her pant leg. In that case, he was released on a $1,000 bail. In hindsight, people are criticizing that decision. I wouldn't think hindsight would be required. Didn't anybody at the time think, well, this is ridiculous? And that's really my point. That's my main thinking right now in this moment. Domestic abuse, domestic violence. If there's any one single common thread to the perpetrators of mass casualties, whether by car or by gun, you can dissect this 1,000 different ways. But the one common thread you're almost always going to find, not only in these extreme horrific cases, but in crime generally, 99 times out of 100, before the crime that makes the headlines, you're going to find a history of domestic crime. And it's about damn time we start taking it seriously. You and I talked the other day about a recent backlash against the idea of toxic masculinity. There's a new sort of men's movement afoot, defending the traditional idea of masculinity, of being a strong provider, of being the protector. We need big, strong men to be warriors, to be soldiers, to be police officers, to be firefighters. These are good qualities, to be big and strong and ready to fight. But let's talk about masculinity a little bit. And let's not pretend that toxic masculinity isn't at the heart of all of this. It's either the big tough guy with his big tough SUV who can run over his female victim, or it's more of the incel type, the Kyle Rittenhouse type, who can strap on a gun and feel tough and look tough. I'm not going to fall into the trap of blaming video games. I know there's lots of research on that. and opinions about such things are mostly just from the hip. But the cultural impact can't be ignored. Superhero movies. No, I'm not Tipper Gore. I'm not saying that there's a direct cause. I'm just taking a wide view of our culture. And any honest look at that wide view has to bring you to the conclusion, or at least prompt the question, what the hell is wrong with men? I'm not treading any new ground here. I'm just defending some theories that have been pretty well established, and there's some real resistance to it from conservatives, from traditionalists. Yeah, men have to be tough. Men have to provide. Well, what happens to a man who falls into that belief when economic circumstances and forces way beyond his control threaten his role as the provider? He's just not able to get it done, and he feels weak, and so he lashes out. What happens to this sort of simple, uneducated man who was raised to believe that he should be in charge? And then he goes into a world where he learns the harsh reality that, no, he's not in charge. Women are perfectly capable of accepting you or rejecting you or leaving you, of disagreeing with you, of fighting with you. For all of the backlash against the idea of toxic masculinity, for those who want to uphold old-fashioned ideas about what a man is, I think the findings have been pretty indisputable. We have a problem. So yeah, we want to say this is senseless. It's not senseless. That implies that it just came out of the blue, that it made no sense. Of course it's wrong. I'm not saying it's not wrong. It's tragically wrong. But it can be understood. The numbers tell us that the most dangerous day of the whole year regarding domestic violence against women is Super Bowl Sunday. Now, come on. Men are f***ed up. This tragic scene happened in Waukesha immediately following a last-second heartbreaking loss by the Green Bay Packers to their rival, the Minnesota Vikings. Now, has there been any connection made in this case? No. I don't know why this guy did what he did at the Christmas parade in Waukesha. All I know is that it raises issues that are well established. They're not well established in this case. We don't know exactly what prompted the events of Sunday, but we know what the research tells us. That toxic masculinity exists, it's a problem, that domestic violence is an epidemic, and that the one indicator, the one common thread you can almost always count on, the perpetrators of horrific events will undoubtedly have domestic violence in their past. And if you want to keep pulling that thread, those who are guilty of domestic violence were often, more than often, victims or witnesses of domestic violence in their earlier lives. So let's start thinking, please, about this horrible, vicious cycle, and God damn, let's do something about it. Now, I could be totally wrong about this guy. Maybe he's just nuts. Maybe some synapse just misfired. But that's beside the point. This is not the first case of its kind. It won't be the last. So I'm talking about this today. Get a little personal for a second. My own father was deeply impacted by the expectations of his day. Grew up on a farm, had a strong work ethic, and anybody looking at his life would say, well, he was a good man, he worked hard. And he was. But he was also frustrated by the expectations. He took advantage of them. I never saw him do any housework. I never saw him cook a meal, except for his world-famous Reuben sandwiches that he would make once or twice a year, or do a little grilling outside, which is okay for men to do, expected. But he was the traditional breadwinner. My mother, the traditional housewife. But he wasn't happy. It was just pressure and duty all the time. Died a young man, his life being defined almost entirely by work, by being a provider, by being tough. And there was domestic violence in my home. To this day, I don't know the details. I was the second youngest of a very large family, and we didn't talk about it. I had an uneasy feeling something wasn't quite right. And then later there are some whispers at family gatherings, but to be honest, I didn't really want to know. So when I saw some whispering in the hallway, I went the other direction. So there's a long, long history that goes back generations, and it's resulted in a culture today that's trying like hell to do something about it, some factions. But oh, the resistance, the backlash against redefining gender roles. Be a man. Man up. There are 100 different ways to be a man. There are 100 different ways to be a woman. The words themselves are almost starting to sound silly. For my money, the movement toward gender fluidity, if I had my way, we would just put the pedal down and just make this happen. Just have a huge cultural shift. Because the cultural expectations of men are still so strident and so severe that they've got us all just schizophrenic. The other thing about this terrible story from Waukesha, this is going to make me very unpopular, but I am going to say it. Waukesha is being portrayed today as this middle America, Norman Rockwell sort of setting. In fact, in one of the stories I heard, I think it was the mayor, used that very expression. This is a Norman Rockwell kind of a place, or kind of an event, this annual Christmas parade. Well, maybe it is. But let's also try to understand that Waukesha and Waukesha County, again, just 20 minutes, half hour down the road here on I-94, is in very many ways your standard 1950s, 60s kind of suburb. Remember back in the presidential campaign of 2020, when the Orange Menace was talking about, he was so fixated on suburbs, and he described them in this sort of 1950s bucolic, perfect vision, which was his dog whistle for white. And he was criticized and mocked. Well, that might have been the old idea of the suburbs, but now the suburbs are much more diverse. I don't know about where you live. The suburbs of Milwaukee are very conservative. They're very Trumpy. And they're very, very white. Yeah, there's some diversity. You can't resist history forever. There are changing demographics. But by and large, here in Milwaukee, we call them the WOW counties. W-O-W. Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties surrounding Milwaukee. Extremely white. They got all the money. They got the big houses. They got the nice schools. They got the big, fancy football stadiums for their high school football teams. They are every cliche in the book. I know them well. And in this man's humble opinion, it's the worst kind of breeding ground for toxic ideas. Full-blown, right-wing conservatives, Trumpsters, a mix of open racism with this nouveau racism. You know, the kind of people who say, well, I'm the least racist person you know. Racism is over. Get over it. You're the one causing the problems by pointing race out. I'm colorblind. I don't see it. Well, no, of course you don't see it, because your neighborhood and your kid's school is still 95% white. Oh, well, there's a black kid at my kid's school, and he's everybody's favorite. They all love him. You know this, right? I don't know, maybe you don't. I do. I'm very familiar with this. And while it's pretty rare to have the kind of family that I grew up in, the father who goes out, works, and provides, and the mother who stays home, there's still some. Most women these days, of any household, they work outside the house, of course. This is the 21st century. But old 19th century attitudes are far from gone. And among those attitudes that even though most women in families work outside the home, they do the great bulk of the work inside the home. They do the shopping and the laundry, and they take care of the kids, and they do the cooking and the cleaning. We know this. And a certain idea of being a man has been maintained and fortified in these suburban enclaves. And millions upon millions of people live in them. And that's what Waukesha is. The most fertile breeding ground for toxic masculinity, for domestic abuse. Not only a breeding ground, but a fortress, a great little hiding place when everyone's isolated in their own 4-bedroom homes with the attached garage, whose doors open remotely. You can live a pretty secluded life in a fortress like that. It can hide a lot of Stepford secrets. I am not a fan of the suburbs. You'll never make me a fan of the suburbs. They create and allow toxic thoughts, toxic behavior, not to mention the disaster they are for the environment. It's not only the social environment, it's the physical environment. It's the damn planet we're talking about. We could do a whole show, and we probably should, and maybe we have, about how atrociously wrong-headed the suburbs are, just physically. The built landscape, the land use, water use, energy use. Everything required for the suburbs to even exist is wreaking havoc on the planet. So, we'll talk about that another time. Right now, I'm talking about the social environment. It's a bastion for old, antiquated, and dangerous ideas. And right at the top, domestic violence. Happening in those beautiful homes, and people are in hock up to their neck. They're maintaining a lifestyle that they think they want, that they think they deserve. Everybody's in debt way up over their ears just to maintain this charade. And so the pressure to continue, the pressure to be a man, the pressure to provide, to be the tough guy, to be the protector. And when you can't keep up, or if you feel like you're not getting the gratitude you deserve, there are lots of ways to lash out. Or if you can never quite achieve that, if you're still the incel, you're the guy in his 20s or 30s living in the basement of one of those suburban homes, and you can't achieve the ideal that your own father has created for you. You buy the house, you provide for the family, you protect the family. Well, somehow that hasn't worked out for you. So you can't get a date, and you're in the basement playing Grand Theft Auto most Saturday nights. And then you turn into a Kyle Rittenhouse or some other kind of misfit. Maybe somebody who winds up plowing their car into a crowd of people. For one reason or another, you just can't live up to this idealized notion of what a man is. And that's what it comes down to for me. We got to get right down to the heart of this. Mass casualty events. This one didn't include a gun, but most of them do. Regardless, It's always a man. And we like to point out that it was a senseless act and the guy was crazy or insane or troubled. But then we don't take it any further. What made him this way? What kind of a culture breeds this man? You can't have it both ways. You can't be this strong advocate for the traditional conservative archetype of the strong provider and the protector, and then take no responsibility for the damage that inflicts on so many thousands of men and the women and children you've literally put in their care because you've created a world where, deserving or not, the men have the power. So whatever progress we're making just can't come fast enough for me. We have to just destroy the old gender norms. When women and men are respected equally in every facet of the economy and culture, when every gender on the spectrum is honored equally, when there are no false expectations based on old, tired, anachronistic social constructs, we can't get to that world fast enough. And I know the pushback here. I know that to many people right now I'm sounding like just an old-fashioned, stereotypical, bleeding heart liberal. I always want to look for root causes. I can't admit there are just bad people out there. Yeah, okay, I guess I'll confess to that. No, I can't just admit there are just bad people. I can't just leave it at that. There are root causes. I'm not going to apologize for that point of view. There absolutely are root causes. There are biopsychosocial causes. And if it's just in your brain, if it's just your biology, okay, then we'll see what we can do about that. We'll get you the meds you need. We'll keep an eye on you. But that's only part of the puzzle. The rest is psychological and social. And how you were raised has an awful damn lot to do with how you come out. And that's where the vicious cycle comes into play. Abused as a kid, you're going to be an abuser as an adult. And then the social cues, the social rewards and punishments you've been given. There's the toxic suburb I'm talking about. The Stepford families, masquerading as Norman Rockwell magazine covers. So we got to take this larger picture into account. And we got to do something about it. And there are real ways to do something right now today. There are some laws right now being considered regarding domestic violence. Like the minute you're accused, or at least the minute you're convicted, your gun rights are gone. There are laws on the books and there are laws being considered in that regard. And we can take that idea a lot further. We can start taking domestic violence a lot more seriously. At the first suspicion, at the first accusation, certainly at the first conviction, we need driver's license taken away, we need guns taken away, we need a closer watch on these guys. We need to understand the indisputable truth that domestic violence is a prime indicator, a predictor for greater violence ahead. Not that the domestic violence itself isn't bad enough. Of course it is. And again, let's go back and pull that thread a little bit. Just ask a few why questions. Why is the domestic violence so hard to escape? Well, economically, it's hard for a family to break up. It's hard for a woman to escape with her kids. You can take a chance that the domestic violence might somehow recede, or you could take a chance on the real possibility of debilitating poverty, trying to go on your own and raise your kids without the support of a partner. So this takes us down to very fundamental issues about how the society is organized, about work, about wages, about living conditions. This gets right down to the basics of human rights that you and I talk about all the time. Every single man, woman, and child in this country, on this planet, has basic human rights. Shelter, clothing, food, safety, education. If all of those things were guaranteed as they should be, it would strip away the power. But toxic men, for whatever reason, however they got there, whatever biopsychosocial forces created them, they only have power over their partners, over their children, because they are dependent on their abuser for the roof over their heads, for the food in their stomachs, because they are not afforded their basic human rights. So we get down to some very fundamental questions on how the world ought to work. Until we recognize the basic human rights of every man, woman, and child, we don't deserve to be called civilized. And the very least we can do, under our current conditions, is see to it that domestic abusers are systematically eliminated from the opportunity of repeat offenses, let alone the next level offenses creating mass casualties. Well, here's hoping for better days and a better understanding of where we are and where we need to go. All right. Well, I haven't done this in a while. Let me remind you about a couple of things. That is, if you want to hear this episode again or recommend it to a friend or listen to past episodes, go to charlesburcell.com. You'll see the menu there. Go to the podcasts, go to the log. It's real easy. Of course, you can go to any of your favorite podcast platforms. We'll probably be there. When you do that, search for Charles Burcell. All of the different titles. We've done a few different podcasts over the years. They all fall under the title Charles Burcell Presents. I encourage you to visit me in social media. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Always, of course, every time you comment or like or especially share the podcast, that certainly aids in our distribution, so thanks for that. Thanks to River West Radio, our terrestrial flagship station, riverwestradio.com. And thanks to Peter Donalds, who composed and performs our theme song. And especially thanks to you. I really do appreciate that you find the podcast occasionally, or some of you every day. The fact that you're listening really means a lot to me, and I hope I'm providing some good service for you. I hope I'm giving you something to think about, and let's all keep fighting the fight, all right? Okay. I love you. I'm Charles Burcell.